Shalom Aleichem and Shavot Tov. This is Rabbi Kovacs, and Mishnah Yomi continues for Hey Ba'av. We are in the first chapter of Beitzah, Mishnah Vav. Beit Shammai Omrim. Beit Shammai says, Ein molichin challah. We do not bring challah. Now, this is not a loaf of bread. This is the portion that's separated from a dough that's prepared and given to the Kohen. It's a form of truma, as we explained in Masechet Challah. So we don't bring that. Umatanot, or gifts, LeKohen b'Yom Tov, to a Kohen Yom Tov. Now, these gifts we're talking about are portions of an animal, any animal that's slaughtered, even outside of the temple, that are given as gifts to the local Kohen. And they're the Zeroa, L'chaim, and the Keva, the right front leg, and the jaws, and one of the stomachs. Now, Beit Shammai continues, Bein Jechurma be'emesh, whether you actually separated these yesterday, emesh means yesterday, before Yom Tov started, Bein Jechurma be'yom, or if you separated them on the day of Yom Tov itself. Beit Hillel matirin, and again, Beit Hillel allows this to give challah or the other matanot to a Kohen on Yom Tov itself, even if they had technically been separated the day before and theoretically could have been given erev Yom Tov. Amr lahem Beit Shammai. So Beit Shammai says to Beit Hillel, Gezerah Shava. Our opinion is based on a Gezerah Shava, which is one of the methods of being explaining and expounding the Torah. But here they're using it in the sense of as a logical comparison. Challah umatanot, challah and these parts of the animal, matana leKohen, they're a gift to the Kohen. Utruma matana leKohen, and truma, as we learned, is a gift to the Kohen. Keshem she'ein molichin et truma, but you can't bring truma to the Kohen in Yom Tov. Kach ein molichin et matanot. So too you can't bring challah and the other parts of the animal. Amru lahem Beit Hillel. So Beit Hillel said back to Beit Shammai, lo, it's not a logical comparison. Ima martin betruma, you're talking about truma. Shayina zakai b'chamerata. You don't have permission to separate truma on Yom Tov. Tomru b'matanot, you're going to compare that to these matanot, to the challah and the parts of the animal, shezakai b'ramatan, that you are allowed to separate them on Yom Tov itself. So what's going on in the background here is, as we explained in Masechet Truma, that the obligation to separate the truma from your crops is when those crops are finished. So when you've done the finishing steps of the agricultural processing, maybe it's heaping it, maybe it's smoothing down the heap, having it set aside that it's done. So there's a step of processing needed to create the obligation to separate truma. And that processing, whatever it is forbidden to do on Yom Tov. On Yom Tov, we can prepare food, but we don't prepare our grain to go into the grain silo. Therefore, you can't create the obligation to separate truma on Yom Tov, unlike the gifts, where if you need some dough, if it's big enough, you do have an obligation of challah, and if you slaughter an animal to have fresh meat on Yom Tov, you do have an obligation for the Kohanic gifts. So that's why Beit Hillel does not accept Beit Shammai's comparison. On to Mishnah Zayin, Beit Shammai Omrim, Tavlin nidochin b'modoch shel eitz. If you want to grind spices on Yom Tov to put into your soup or your cholent, you can do it with a modoch, a pestle of eitz. Now, normally they would use stone. Stone is harder. Eitz is a shinui. It's a change from the normal way of doing things. So Beit Shammai says, since grinding generally, not for food purposes, is completely forbidden, so when we grind for food purposes, we should use a shinui so you don't come to do any forbidden grinding. They go on hamelach, bepach, uve eitz, haporut. And salt, we're talking about a clump of salt, like maybe salt from the Dead Sea. Well, that's not really edible. We're talking about clumps of salt. And you should have really ground it erev Yom Tov, because your salt's not going to lose any flavor. The spices, we understand, you want to grind them right away, so they're fresh right before you put them into the cholent. But the salt, you could grind it last week, it's still going to be good. It's not going to spoil. So Beit Shammai says you need more of a shinui. He says use a pach, a flask, like the bottom of a Coke bottle. I don't know if they had Coke bottles back then, maybe. Uva eitz, or a wooden spoon, haporut. That's a mixing spoon. So you shouldn't use a pestle at all. You should use something else, like the back of the spoon, as a shinui. Beit Hillel Omrim, Beit Hillel again is mekel, tavlin nidochin kedarkan. Spices, you can grind them normally. You need to have fresh spices to enjoy your Yom Tov cholent. B'modoch shel even, using a grinder, a pestle of stone. V'melach b'modoch shel eitz. And when you're grinding salt, you could have ground the salt yesterday, So let's have you make a little bit of a shinui if you're grinding it on Yom Tov itself, and use a wooden pestle, not the normal stone pestle. Yishar kochachem, Shavua Tov, sei gesund.